Hey everybody, welcome back to Code with Vinny. Today I'm going to be showing you how to deploy a full stack application on AWS. What's really nice about this method of deployment is that it's extremely inexpensive. So you can see on my AWS account that I don't really pay much at all, about $1 a month. And if I hover over my most expensive month, we can see that the services that I'm paying the most for are Route 53 and Registrar. And basically what that means is that I'm paying for domain names. You obviously don't have to pay for domain names, and we're not going to be doing any of that in this video. So it's going to be even more inexpensive for you. Essentially, it's going to be free. You might just be charged a couple of cents. Like one of the services we're going to be using is Amplify, and you can see that I'm getting charged 1 cent for this particular month. So it's really inexpensive. It's going to be as close to free as it can get. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So the application that we're going to be deploying today is actually right here on my GitHub. I'm going to have this link in the description below. Feel free to fork this over and follow along if you want to deploy it yourself. So we have a mono repo here with our UI, that's a React application, and our API, that's an Express server. We're going to be going and deploying our UI or React app using AWS Amplify, like I mentioned previously. And then we're going to go ahead and deploy our API on AWS Lambda. And we're going to be hosting our database using DynamoDB. So as far as the functionality of this application, it's pretty straightforward. Just your typical CRUD application. You can create tasks, edit tasks, delete tasks, and obviously see them. But if you want to get a better understanding of how everything works, I have a full video of me building this application and deploying it. So I'll leave that link in the description below as well if you want to check that out. Anyways, with that being said, let's go ahead and head over to AWS. The first thing we're going to do is deploy our database. So we're going to go to the top and search DynamoDB. And if you've never created a DynamoDB table, it should look just like this. And we're just going to go ahead and click Create Table. Now here we're just going to create our table name. In my case, it needs to be tasks. That's because I already have the code written and that's the name that I'm using. But you can name it whatever you want. The next thing it's asking for is a partition key. And essentially this needs to be a unique value. So I like to call it ID. There also is something called a sort key, and it's optional, but essentially that allows you to sort and search items in your DynamoDB table. And if you do use a sort key, the partition key and the sort key will be combined to create a unique primary key. In our case, we're not going to worry about the sort key for now, so we're just going to go down to the bottom and create our table. Okay, now we can see that our table is successfully created. One thing to know about DynamoDB is that it is a NoSQL database. If you notice, we didn't have to specify what our columns were going to be when we were creating the table. That's because when we go and push items to our table, it's going to specify the columns then. So for example, I'm creating a task list. So each item I push to the table is going to have 3 columns. The ID, which is the partition key, a name, which is just going to be a string, and then a completed status, which is just a boolean. And as I go and push those items, I'll see those columns emerge. Now we are officially done with DynamoDB, so we're going to head and go over to Lambda. And this is where we're going to deploy our API at, so we're going to go ahead and create a function. And I'm just going to call this task list API. All of this looks fine. I'm going to go ahead and go down to advanced settings and enable function URL. I'm going to put the auth type to none. And I'm going to go ahead and configure cores. Now I'm just going to go ahead and create my function. Okay, so my function is successfully created. So now we need to actually get our code in the Lambda function. So the easiest way to do that is with a zip file. So what I like to do is just take the contents of my API and create the zip file. Then we can just go over to this upload from dropdown, hit zip file, and just select that zip file we just created. Save. Now that our Lambda function has our code, we have to go and change a couple things. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to configuration right here. And under function URL, I'm going to hit edit. And we're just going to go down to expose headers. And we're going to add a new value. And I'm just going to put a star. That just means all. It's basically just a wildcard character. And we're going to do that for allow headers as well. And then for all methods, you can actually do the star as well. In my case, I know I'm just going to be using get, post, put, and delete. So I'm just going to select those. It's typically best practice to only allow privileges that you actually need. So now we've allowed our API to be hit by certain types of HTTP requests, but our API or our Lambda function doesn't have permissions to communicate with DynamoDB. So we need to go ahead and do that next. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to permissions. And if I scroll down, we can see that we have permissions to communicate with Amazon CloudWatch, but we don't have permissions to communicate with DynamoDB. So to go ahead and change that, I'm just going to go ahead and click on this role name right here. And this brings us over to a service called IAM, which essentially allows us to manage permissions. And we're going to click into this policy name. Now we're going to go ahead and edit this policy. And then we're going to use the visual editor just because it's a little bit easier. And we're going to add permissions. And we're just going to choose our service, DynamoDB. And you can see effect, we have it as allow. And we're just going to allow all DynamoDB actions. Resources, we're going to select all as well. Now we're just going to hit next. Now we can see that it's showing we have permissions to communicate with CloudWatch and DynamoDB. That's exactly what we want, so we're going to hit save. So we no longer have to use IAM anymore, so I'm just going to get rid of these two tabs. Now if we go ahead and look at our Lambda function again, I'm going to refresh this real quick. And look at the permissions tab. We can see DynamoDB is here, so everything looks good. Now we are officially done with our API. So now we just need to go ahead and deploy our React app on Amplify. So before I go and deploy my front end, I want to make sure that I'm using this API URL, so I'm hitting the right place. So I'm going to go back to my code and just update that. And in my API, I know the path is task, so I just added that on. Now I'm just going to push these changes to GitHub. Now that my front end's using the correct API URL, we're going to go back to AWS. And we are going to use our last service called Amplify. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a new app. Host web app. GitHub or whatever version control you're using. Now I've already connected GitHub to my AWS. But if yours isn't connected, it's pretty easy. Then you just want to go ahead and select the repository that you're going to use. In our case, it's task list tutorial. My main branch is master, so that's correct. And I am using a mono repo, so I'm going to go ahead and check this. And the front end directory is actually called UI. And now I can just go ahead and hit next. So here you can see the commands that AWS is going to use when it builds our application. And I usually like to edit this and remove the npm CI just for a traditional npm install, just because I've ran into npm CI issues in the past. So then I'm going to go down and hit next and save and deploy. So right now it's provisioning resources, then it's going to move on to the build stage, and then finally deploy our application. Once all this is green, we can go ahead and click this URL and our application will be successfully deployed. So it looks like our application is deployed. Let's go and check it out. So if I go and add a task, it seems to be working, and now I can also check a task. Let's see if edit works. So it seems like everything's working just fine. Let's go ahead and go back to DynamoDB for a second though. check out our tables and click tasks, explore table items, we can see that our item is successfully in the database. So our full stack application is working exactly the way we wanted it to. And one cool thing that I didn't mention about AWS Amplify is that whenever we push our code to our main branch, or in my case it's called master, it'll automatically redeploy the application. So you'll always have your most current changes deployed, which is pretty cool. With that being said, that's about it for this tutorial. If you guys enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.